Okay, sorry, I got confused there. You take it away. Go for it.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. Okay, I'm Darren Bridget, team leader in city planning. You may recall ECAN briefing councillors on the RPS review process earlier this year on the 23rd of January. We now have a draft of the RPS, and ECAN staff are here today to present some of that to you. Within the council, a staff group has been formed, led by Glenda Dixon in the city planning team to provide feedback. The staff from ECAN are Meg Buddle, the senior planner, who is the planning liaison with Christchurch City Council, Amanda Thompson, who's the team leader of strategy, and Paul Thompson, who's principal planner. Our council staff are still considering the draft objectives and policies and how they may apply to our district's context. To date, no Section 32 analysis has been provided with the draft RPS, so any feedback that comes from this won't have been informed by a Section 32, but I'll hand over now for the presentation.
Kia ora koutou. Ko Meg tōku ingoa, I'm Meg Buddle. This is Amanda and Paul. And as Darren said, we're here from ECAN. So hopefully the presentation won't take too long, and then we can open up for questions, or if you do have a burning question throughout the presentation, perhaps just jump in there.
Do them at the end.
Okay.
It just seems to be a bit quicker, so yep.
Roger that. So the purpose of today was to quickly go over where we're at with the RPS review process, to give you a quick RMA document 101, to then explain how our new draft RPS looks different to the current operative RPS, then to run through about 6 specific topics that we think will be of interest to the council, and then lastly to talk about the next steps for giving us feedback. So the RPS review timeline, we're currently at that second bubble in. So you, as Darren said, we came to talk to you in January about the draft RPS, and at that point we were consulting with the wider community about the outcomes that the community wanted for the region and the policy options to achieve those outcomes. Since January, we've now prepared a draft regional policy statement, or RPS, and we're currently sharing that draft for Clause 3, Schedule 1 consultation, and that's Clause 3, Schedule 1 of the RMA. We have to do that as part of the RMA. The mandatory list of stakeholders for Clause 3 is actually quite small. It includes relevant Crown ministers, mana whenua and territorial authorities, but just to note that we've decided to consult more widely than that mandatory list. So we're also consulting with infrastructure groups, industry groups and community groups. Over June and July, so that current bubble that we're at, we're presenting the draft RPS to the various stakeholders through some webinars, workshops, Q&A sessions and councillor briefings like this one. Then moving on to the next bubble, in August and September, our team will go away and revise the draft RPS based on the feedback. And then second to last bubble, the intention is that in October, November, our decision makers will approve the RPS to go out for notification, and then formal notification will commence in December this year. It's important to note that at this point in the pre-notification consultation, we don't think we have a final or polished document by any means. But we think that this draft is a pretty good foundation to share with stakeholders and hear your feedback. So this is, I'll just flick through this really briefly because I'm sure you're familiar with RMA hierarchy, but we have the Act at the top, and then the next row down is what we call national direction, so national environmental standards and national policy statements. They must give effect to the Act, and then the next row down, the RPS must give effect to the national direction as well as the Act. Final row down on the slide, hopefully you can see that on your screens, but it says regional and district plans, which are the rule books for managing natural and built resources. So one key thing to note is that your district plan needs to give effect to the regional policy statement. We wanted to highlight that this new draft RPS is quite different to the current Canterbury Regional Policy Statement, and it's certainly different to other RPSs around the country. The left-hand side of that slide with the sort of vertical integration, that's representing how our current RPS works. So it's got a very linear structure. Each topic, for instance, coast, freshwater, Indigenous biodiversity, has all of the issues and objectives within that one chapter. And moving to the draft RPS, which is the right-hand side of the slide, instead of the old compartmentalized approach, we've designed something that's a little bit more integrated. So we have 2 chapters which have all of the objectives regardless of topic within them. Those 2 chapters are integrated management objectives and mana whenua objectives. And those 2 chapters drive the policies. So all of the policies which relate to a certain topic, like coast or freshwater, must give effect to this package of objectives, which kind of sit at the top of the pyramid, if that makes sense. And there's no hierarchy among those objectives. So the intent is that this will help kind of resolve conflicts between policies or objectives easily. Another difference between our current RPS and this new draft is that the draft is developed in partnership with Papatipu Runanga. So those policies need to, as I said before, they need to achieve both the integrated management and the mana whenua objectives. And I'll talk a little bit more later about the mana whenua involvement. So how we arrived at this point, how we put the draft together, we considered 5 different things. So firstly, the current state of the environment based on the available scientific information, and the existing issues in the operative RPS and iwi management plans. We then did some community engagement, including engaging with the district and city councils. We worked with Runanga representatives to both draft the RPS and in terms of decision making. So the issues and objectives, we have a mana whenua chapter which was largely drafted by Runanga representatives, and then those same representatives reviewed and gave us feedback on the wider provisions. And we will continue to work with our Runanga representatives to ensure that the draft RPS meets those mana whenua objectives. We also took on board feedback and direction from our governing body, Toropu Tuia. So Toropu Tuia is made up of all of the ECAN councillors and then 10 Runanga representatives. And lastly, national direction. So that has significantly shaped the draft RPS. some of this national direction, so that's a national policy statement or a national environmental standard, is really prescriptive and it doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room in the for our RPS. We know that the national government has, or the coalition government has earmarked some of the national direction for changes, and we've been conscious of those signals coming from central government, and we've tried to draft the document in a way that gives effect to those national instruments without necessarily being wedded to the specific language that's currently in the national direction. If and when that national legislation changes, we will need to respond to that, obviously, and whether that's before notifying the RPS or post-December 2024 during the hearings on the RPS, or once it's operative, we will need to respond to any changes from central government within their timeframes. So those were the sort of introductory scene setting slides. I'll just pass to Amanda, who's going to talk about urban form.
Cool. So hi, I'm Amanda. So the draft regional policy statement aims to align urban form with the Greater Christchurch Partnership Spatial Plan. The current RPS includes Map A, which highlights the future development areas. We've effectively got a new generation of that with some amendments in line with the spatial plan. The draft policies focus on targeted intensification and higher densities in appropriate areas, aligning with the spatial plan and the national policy statement on urban development. There's new density requirements for both greenfield intensification areas and brownfield development areas. These new requirements represent a significant increase from the current RPS, and we welcome feedback, particularly from councils, on these changes. Development within future urban areas is identified in the spatial plan, and additional greenfield development outside of these areas should be avoided unless it meets the significant development criteria. The NPSUD introduced a pathway for considering plan changes that provide significant development capacity, even if they're unanticipated or out of sequence with the planned land release. The draft RPS includes new criteria for evaluating these plan changes, and that's been developed through the input from the 4 Greater Christchurch councils last year. Outside of Greater Christchurch, the RPS emphasises strategic growth and planning, promoting management of urban growth and development in an integrated and coordinated and strategic way, in a similar way to how Greater Christchurch did it. The new policies have been introduced to enhance housing affordability, climate resilience in urban areas, and there's a new housing choice and affordability policy that requires councils to provide a range of housing to meet community needs. Climate resilient urban areas will be supported through urban greening, water sensitive urban design, green infrastructure, and efficient water and energy use in a way that manages heat and other impacts. We've set some minimum residential densities, and as I said, they're based on the densities that were in the spatial plan. They are fairly high. It's a significant uplift. It's a significant increase from the current density requirements. That's all on this slide. Did you want to ask questions now on this topic, or should we just carry? I'll just pass to Paul to cover highly productive land.
Kia ora. So with highly productive land, there's national direction, the NPS HPL, that contains both policy and directions to local government, and the RPS responds by carrying forward that policy, which is seeking to maintain the availability of New Zealand's most favourable soils for primary production. There are some exceptions to that overall broad approach, but that is contained in the national direction. The other aspect is that the national direction requires the RPS to put forward mapping of highly productive land in the region. So we've put forward some mapping that follows the prescriptive criteria in that national direction. And that's for people to review and to comment on.
Back to me. So our natural hazards policies are a little bit different than the previous generation of the RPS. The hazards and risks chapter includes a comprehensive set of policies designed to mitigate against various natural hazards, so flooding, landslides, coastal erosion, and wildfires. They establish clear and measurable mitigation standards, ensuring that natural hazard risks are reduced to a tolerable level. It's a little bit different. We used to have sort of mapped out high hazard areas where you had to avoid or mitigate hazards, but there was no clear direction on what would meet that mitigation standard. So we've tried to make that a bit more clear. The way that this works, like Megan mentioned before, we've got an integrated approach. So we've got the objectives all in sort of one chapter or two chapters together. So the urban form and development chapter really drives where development should happen. And so as part of that chapter's policies, you've got to identify where future development should go, and you need to take into account natural hazard risk, ideally not choosing areas where the mitigation cost would be super high or where natural hazard risks might be unsustainable in the future. You also need to consider it from an infrastructure provision perspective. So if it's going to be too expensive to provide infrastructure and the natural hazard risk to that infrastructure doesn't line up, then that would be a place that would be suggesting that you shouldn't enable development. So you have to get through those steps and then to the natural hazards chapter to then get to the standards that you'd need to meet, but you'd have predetermined that it was a suitable location generally for the other urban development reasons. We've also included a climate adaptation policy. So we haven't gone as far as having a really detailed manage retreat policy, but we have enabled it, created some streamlined direction so that we can take away the barriers and hurdles from people that need to do that, and also make it a bit more streamlined and efficient for people to put in place mitigation that might be required to enable existing communities to stay where they are. So hopefully that helps bridge the gap. I think we're expecting more national direction in the future and hopefully some funding that will better support those processes moving forward. But this is about as far as we felt we could take it at this stage. Pass on to Meg for airport noise.
Alrighty. So the airport noise policies, they're designed to manage land use and reverse sensitivity effects on the Christchurch International Airport, sitting in the energy infrastructure and transport chapter of the RPS, if anyone's interested. That policy sits alongside a map, which is now called the Greater Christchurch Map, and it shows the remodelled contours as opposed to the current contour, which was modelled in 2008. So that's the map that's sitting on the right-hand side of the slide. The new airport noise policy takes a graded approach across the 50 and 55 dB contours, and apologies if this is really technical, but hopefully you're following this to some extent. So that the graded approach means that some development could occur within those two contours, so the 50 and the 55, where it can meet acoustic insulation standards and a number of other policies, which I won't read out, but they're sitting on the slide. And then we come to within the 65 contour, which is that red line shown on the map. Development must be avoided. There's a hard boundary there. I think it's day-night average, but it's kind of just an acoustic metric, which I try not to get into too much. So the new draft policy is different from the current policy and the RPS, and we're certainly expecting and have already received a lot of feedback on that shift. The current policy in the RPS directs that any new noise sensitive activity within the 50 contour must be avoided unless it's within an existing urban area or a greenfield priority area. So I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with the current RPS. We have a map A in there, and it's got a blue dotted line showing the outskirts of the 50 contour. So I touched on it before, the remodelling of the contours. Some of you might be aware that in 2023 that the Christchurch International Airport completed the remodelling of their contours, and they produced 2 sets of contours depending on which modelling methodology was chosen. So there was an annual average set and an outer envelope set. The annual average, it's in the name, it represented the 1 year averaged noise exposure, and then the outer envelope set represented the sort of 4 worst case scenarios for each runway overlapped on each other. The map up on the screen, which we're using for the draft policy at the moment, has adopted the annual average modelling set, not the outer envelope worst case scenario set. And that was everything on airport noise. Freshwater.
Okay, freshwater. This is our last slide before questions. So the RPS sets the overall approach to be taken to freshwater management in the region. It does this through tools such as setting environmental limits and targets for freshwater quantity and quality, which mainly takes place through the regional plans. But in doing so, affects all users of the water resource in the region. The approach in the draft RPS builds upon the work that's previously been undertaken by the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, and that includes sustainability principles and community involvement in freshwater management, with changes to align with national direction, which is contained in the National Policy Statement Freshwater Management 2020. So these changes include, there's an objective that to achieve Te Manawa Te Wai, which sets the overall approach for freshwater management. This puts the health of water bodies and freshwater ecosystems first. Includes the identification of freshwater management units, FMUs. These are the largest units for managing water. And contrary to what the slide says, actually there's 4 proposed FMUs in the Christchurch City Council district. There's the 3 that are shown on the map on the slide. That's the Ashley, Rakahuri, Waimakariri, Ihutai FMU. There's the Whakaraupo, Lyttelton Harbour Freshwater Management Unit, the Banks Peninsula, Te Pataka o Rakahutu Freshwater Management Unit, and the Te Waihora Selwyn Freshwater Management Unit, which is just located to the south of the highlighted areas on those slides, on those maps. So in identifying freshwater management areas, there's no one size fits all. It's very much a question of the right scale in the right place, a balance between being too large and a loss of local context versus too small and a loss of strategic scale and creating inefficiencies. So the proposed freshwater management units are catchment based. That's been the founding principle to how they've been proposed. The job of the freshwater management unit sits at setting long-term visions for the areas of the region. They must be ambitious, but with achievable outcomes and state timeframes. The visions are water-centric objectives in the draft RPS. So they refer to the values and connections held towards water and specific water bodies in each area, such as ecosystem health, human health, recreation, cultural values. And the values sit across all well-beings. So alongside the mapped areas, there are separate statements of what those visions are proposed to be. Other changes for the freshwater package, there's a much more outcomes-focused policy. So in putting forward the health of water bodies first, there's greater recognition that a healthy ecosystem supports a healthy community and economy, alongside the need for resource users to adjust and continual improvement within timeframes, but with clear signals that further investment in land management practices may not always be enough, and land use change composition may be needed. So this outcome-focused approach means there's a stronger support for strategic land use and infrastructure planning in rural as well as in urban environments, which Amanda has spoken about. And that's alongside the recognition of the importance of flexibility, certainty, and cost effectiveness. So other changes in that freshwater package, Rangatiratanga and Kaitiakitanga, so strengthened recognition of the partnership approach to freshwater management, the importance of tikanga, Mātauranga Māori in decision making, and the need for environmental limits and targets that provide for Mahinga Kai. There's a strong emphasis on catchment-based approach, so stronger focus and support for catchment and collective actions within those catchments. There's the recognition as well of the role of land and water management for climate change. So the role that land and water management can play in supporting a low emissions economy and meet emissions reduction targets, which are proposed. Also enabling policy for water storage infrastructure, which meets environmental targets and limits. And then finally, water bodies. The freshwater package includes provisions for management of water bodies, specific provisions for what's termed special water bodies, which are our braided rivers, our wetlands, estuaries, and recognising the extent and array of values that they hold, ensuring their outstanding and significant values are protected and maintained. Thank you.
Great. Just going to flick to the last slide so I don't forget it. So in terms of where to from here, giving your feedback on the draft RPS, obviously we might have some questions and discussion now, but for the formal feedback, I know that your staff are working on getting that to you and signing off on it in the next few weeks. Okay, so that's enough talking from us. Questions or discussion?
Great. So we've got quite a few. So I'll start. Can you go back to the airport noise contours, please? So I've got Andre and then Yanni, was it? Yeah. So can you just explain? So I just want to get my head around what's changed.
Yes.
So, because this looks like, and maybe I got it wrong, this looks like quite a big change.
Correct.
Yeah. So we're effectively looking at reducing the noise contour from 55 to 50. Is that what we're saying?
The current noise contour is at 50, but the area reduces because as you sort of go from, as the number gets smaller, the area gets larger, if that makes sense.
As the number gets smaller,
so
the area gets...
the 50 contour is larger in area than the 55 contour.
Oh, so we're looking at almost removing the 50 contour.
There is some management within the 50 contour.
Right.
It's on that bullet point with the green text on it up on the screen, but it's certainly a lot less than there is currently in the RPS. And then that hard management kicks in at the 55 instead of the 50. Yeah, so at the 55, does that change from the current? So because I guess I'll put my cards on the table, I'm quite happy with the contour being relaxed. But I just get going through my mind as I want to protect the airport being able to operate. Yes, at all costs. Certainly, and that's the objective that this policy is designed to achieve. So, right. That's what this policy is driving against as well, while trying to also give effect to some kind of really strong changes in higher order documents like the National Policy Statement for Urban Development and the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan, which emphasise residential enablement and intensification, particularly in strategic locations. So I suppose the change is, there are a few reasons for the change, but one of them is that we feel we could kind of achieve that airport protection while allowing some more intensification. Yeah. So, okay. So just final one for me then. So within the 55, so have we changed, so the requirements are changing within that as well? Yeah. So at the moment, if you're within kind of the old 55, but in an existing urban area, the RPS doesn't really give you much direction on what happens in there. but this new policy is saying that you could, any development within that 55 contour must meet this internal noise standard, and also if it has any sort of outdoor element. So if you have a balcony or a backyard, the developer would have to show that there's going to be no effects on the airport, no reverse sensitivity effects, or the presumption is that that you start with an avoid presumption, and it's on the onus is on the developer to shift that away.
So within that 55 contour, if the rules are changing, and I'm correct if I'm getting it wrong, are we relaxing the rules within that 55 contour?
I'd say if we take like the example of a greenfield area, perhaps, although it probably is really difficult for anyone to get through that avoid pathway. But when we're talking about an existing residential area, the current RPS had an exception to the avoid direction, if that makes sense. So the RPS already said you don't need to abide by that hard no if you're within an existing residential area.
Okay, so then just finally, then sorry, we'll move on. So if within that 55 contour, the changes to the rules, are we exposing the airport to greater, and I know we're here in a planning capacity as opposed to a shareholder in the airport, but are we likely to get, I'm thinking 15, 20 years down the track, to a point where the airport are in a position where we've created more intensification around it, and people are in a position where they want to cut the ability for people to come in and out of the airport at all hours? Has that been sort of considered? That's
certainly a really key question. We think that we're getting the balance right. It's certainly something which is done, that kind of 55 line is something which is used by airports around the country. So we're in line with that to some extent.
Right, and do they
but we're definitely expecting a lot of feedback on the point of airport protection.
So those other airports, just are they all sort of operating 24/7 as well?
Just Auckland, I think.
Yes, yeah, just
right. Okay. It would be good to just capture to our guys' team just around, I mean, in our feedback, just that underlying, that long-term view of the airport and making sure we're not putting it at risk.
Sorry, I'll just say a couple of things. Firstly, you might already be aware, but those contours don't represent the noise that's happening today. It represents their kind of ultimate capacity that the Christchurch Airport could ever get to. So it's expected to be reached in kind of 2084. So the contours that we're using are already projecting out many, many years ahead.
Right, okay.
And second important thing to note is that we're certainly looking for feedback on this. If you think that we're striking the balance wrong and we need to increase the protection or go the other way, then we'd love to hear that.
No, that's okay. I mean, they've been really helpful answers. I appreciate that. Okay, sorry, team. Victoria, Sarah, Mel, Mark, Andre, Yanni, Aaron. So Vic first.
Thank you. Sorry to labour the point on the airport contours, but I'm just going to pick up on a couple of things on the tail end. You mentioned the 2084 capacity. It seems such a way out. Do other airports use that same timeline in their methodologies as well?
I don't know enough about the other New Zealand airports off the top of my head, so I'd probably be getting it wrong. Using ultimate capacity is certainly a valid modelling approach.
Okay, so talking then about that methodology, what are the other airports in New Zealand particularly used? Are they operating on an average or an outer envelope methodology?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, sorry, Councillor, but I can certainly, if you're interested, kind of review my notes and send you some detail on that.
So it picks up on the other point then where you said you'd already received some feedback on this remodelling. Is there any of that you can share with us?
I'm not too sure, actually. We haven't gotten any written feedback, so it would be difficult, but I can talk to my colleagues about when we do.
It's just generally on both sides of the spectrum. Some people would like it to be wider and provide more protection. Some people would like to have more development. So at the moment we're just getting a mixture like that.
Yeah, I understand that. So can I dial right back to the beginning then when you talked about your pre-notification consultation and you said that you were going wider than the mandatory list that you'd been expected to use. I'm interested particularly in, you said community groups. Who more specifically are you doing this pre-notification consultation with in that category?
Yeah, so there's a long list of
about 150 groups
of stakeholders.
It's basically a groups of people who engage with us through the 2 campaigns that we did last year, as well as your usual sort of irrigators and federated farmers, all those kind of key stakeholder groups. We're trying to go as broad as possible so that we can, I guess, get to the best point we can for notification that's as balanced in terms of what the community think. Because I think at the end of this period, we're going to be presenting the feedback to our councillors, and that's going to be for them to make the call on sort of what direction they'd like us to finish on. So I guess we're just trying to gather as much evidence or as much of the
thank you for that. I'm impressed with that. The other comment then is in relation to the national directions that you talked about. You're expecting there to be a change. 2 questions there is, what is the timeline for that? And secondly, what are you anticipating in line with the new government?
The time frame, but there has been a lot of talk about having some national direction around natural hazards, to, if that's the point you were sort of referring to. We don't have any gauge of when that might come. Probably not too soon, but we do expect, well, we did with the previous government expect some funding to be put in place to support communities. And hopefully that's still on the cards with the new government, but we'll just have to wait and respond to it when it comes through.
Final question then in relation to the highly productive land. Is that a consistent measure across the country, and where's your science and the data coming from for you to determine which is the highly productive land?
The NPS HPL specifies that land is highly productive if it meets certain zoning, and that's certain rural type of zoning. And then it has to be LUC 1 to 3, which is a soil quality classification. And then it has to meet another test, which is has to be large and cohesively or geographically cohesive area. And that's to stop little bits of fragmentation, which will stop other efficient activities taking place. So there's a bit of a stepped methodology to work through. So that's what we followed. It does allow, that methodology that is in the National Policy Statement does allow some regional variation. For example, if there is an established horticultural, agricultural industry that doesn't rely on the best soils, such as viticulture, wine growing and so forth, then we may choose to identify those as highly productive land if it maintains that soil available for that industry. I can say actually in our situation, in our region, we haven't identified any in that category, but that's the kind of feedback we want to hear.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Kia ora, thanks so much for this. A couple of questions. One on the freshwater. And while aquifers aren't surface water and they're not freshwater per se, we do have on our side of the Waimakariri source water protection for our aquifers. And I'm just wondering if the new RPS will include some source water protection on the other side of the Waimakariri now that it's not fully known to be a hydrological barrier for nitrates and things running through into our aquifers.
I think that's very much the role of the freshwater, the FMU visions, is identifying those key issues for particular areas around water. So that would be something to look to ensure that the freshwater management unit that covers that area identifies that significance.
Yeah. So that's really important for us with, supplying water to a very large population. With the urban form and will density requirements be in place for the new areas, those ones that were identified originally in the FDS?
The Greenfield Development Areas.
Greenfield Development Areas.
Yeah, so they're at a lower rate, but yeah, they'd be in there. Well, in the current draft, they're in there, whether they stay in there.
Because in the FDS, we were told we couldn't put them in the original FDS, even though we wanted to because the RPS was going to be coming within a year. But that it would go into the into the RPS with those ones minimum 15, even on the outskirts and stuff. And I'm just wondering, yeah, if it's minimum 15 in those.
Let me just check, because I'm pretty sure it's way more than that.
Oh, that'd be great.
25 for future urban areas. I wouldn't expect these numbers are going to stay like this through this consultation period. And
there'll be some fight back on 25, but I think it's a really good use of space. So that's good. Natural hazards and climate. With the adaptation piece, is the work that's there for adaptation aligned with our adaptation framework? Like so have you seen our adaptation framework as a council that we're currently doing our planning based on? And is your one is it aligned with that? We're not going to have to redo work with our communities and stuff on our planning.
Our policy for that is really high level, so I imagine it would be aligned, and I think we'll rely on your staff to let us know if they believe we need to make some changes to better align with if they've done some more work in that area than us. We did have some communications with the CCC ahead of developing our policies, but effectively it's asking TAs to identify areas that might need to have some sort of adaptation or relocation, and then work with those communities to find a pathway through while taking away some of the planning type barriers that might be in place that would make it more difficult. So it's super high level.
But it directs us to work with people on their own individual private properties and community spaces. So at the moment, our framework's based on public property only. But yeah, so that kind of space.
It would be private property, but it would be coordinating what needs to happen. It's not asking you to fund any of it. It's just
the government's going to do that. Yeah.
Hopefully.
No, not hopefully. So just one for staff. So Bede, if we could get a copy of the draft RPS. Actually, normally these things come out at the same time as the staff initial draft feedback, but it's quite a lot of reading to do. So if we could get the draft to get our heads around it earlier, that would be great. So it's clearly at council now. If we could have a look at the draft, well ahead of the workshop that we do with staff on it, that'd be great. Thank you.
My question was sort of a bit like Sarah's last one about our draft coastal hazards plan change, which we obviously haven't finished yet, and how, the alignment with that and this hazards and risk chapter. So I guess it's...
Our coastal hazards policy is mostly around the flooding risk, and got some tsunami risk in there as well. But I think that that's something that we work through with the council staff. We've got some workshops and things through this consultation period. So hopefully if there's any sort of niggles or inconsistencies, we can get that sorted now before we get to notification. That's the hope of this process.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
How wide are you getting this consultation? Like, I'm thinking at community level, are you going to like residents associations, groups of developers, that sort of thing, to get feedback on this?
We've sort of taken the approach of because we've had to kind of make some sort of limits.
Yeah.
So we've taken it as groups that have been engaged with us throughout the engagement process. We've invited them to be involved. So I know that there was some groups of developers or people that were involved in before the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan. There was the Our Space plan, I guess. Some of those groups had people that wanted to get into the map, so we've approached them through the Greater Christchurch Partnership to give them the opportunity to respond, because we made an obligation to do that at the time. So we have taken it wide, but we've had to limit it to some degree because we've only got so many staff, and we've only got about 8 weeks to get it together. So there is an opportunity, a notification, obviously, for everyone to put in their feedback and go through the submission and hearing processes then. So everyone will get to have an opportunity.
One of the, I guess, things in the back of my head would be that at this stage you might get the feedback from, we'll say, the airport and their noise people to try and protect their contours, but you may not hear the voice of the community that are saying, look, we are quite happy with what we see in the draft RPS, we can abide with that if you want to develop.
We've certainly got groups on both sides of the spectrum for that point.
Good, because for me, I've actually found a copy of the draft RPS, which is good. But the fact you've got the engineering covered for development under the contours gives me comfort. And I would hope the airport would see it the same way, that through the restrictions, they'll have the protection they need. But that'll be interesting to see what they come back with. There's another point in the draft RPS which caught my eye, was about quarrying, where there's a point in there where it's talking about 500-metre setbacks for quarrying activities from residential, which I certainly find agreeable. I'm from the Hornby area, and we have a lot of interaction with quarrying around the Yaldhurst type area. So thank you for putting that in there, and hopefully we can get some positive feedback to keep that in.
Yeah, it'd be great to get some feedback on what people think about that. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, also on airport noise. In particular, the green area, the particular interest around housing around the university, for example, which I'd say is a lack of housing.
Yes.
You had to explain in layman terms what it would mean for what you can build now and what you would be able to build following changes.
Yes.
Basically.
So within the 50, in this sort of 50 to 55 band, you just need to meet an internal noise standard of 40 dB inside. If it's a new build, our evidence and our experts are telling us it's quite easy for a new build to meet that internal standard. So if you're a new kind of residential activity or some sort of accommodation with a building, and it's a new building, it'll likely be quite easy to meet the standard.
Okay. But to enable, for example, being able to build 3 stories would still require a plan change from us.
Yes, I suppose it depends on what the zoning is.
Yeah.
If it's a sort of the current standard residential suburban zoning, then yes.
So what I'm trying to get my head around is sort of the common sense for it all and what the sort of oppositional concerns to it is, because if you got all these old single glazed homes, noise is obviously an issue. So to go to a new home, whether it's intensified or otherwise, it's a new home that's soundproofed. So I can't understand why there's been resistance to ultimately replacing more old homes with newer soundproof homes, which presumably would make less of a noise issue.
Yes. So I suppose just kind of sharing with you some of the messages that we've been getting from different interested people. It's that when you go from one house to medium density, so 3 houses of up to 3 stories, you might be tripling the amount of people on that property, and therefore you're perhaps tripling the risk that someone gets highly annoyed by airport noise. So that's one argument. And then another argument on the opposite side of the ledger is, like you said, if it's an old house that's not very well insulated, then it potentially is a lot noisier than a new house.
Yeah, because it's basically stunting the soundproofing of more homes. In a way,
yes, it certainly would discourage people redeveloping if they can't do it to that kind of medium density that other areas in the city can.
So sorry, you've got to stick with the non-soundproof home. Is the university included in who you would be engaging?
I don't know off the top of my head, actually.
I don't believe the university was in Alice. Would have to check.
Just when it was worthwhile having, because it impacts, well, obviously, it's access to housing for their students ultimately. They may have a view, and those students probably want warmer, dry, more soundproof homes. I would think too. Yeah, nice one. Hey, thank you. That's really useful.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just, I guess, a little bit concerned to hear you talk about finding the balance. I represent an area along the Pauao Heathcote, which has been subject to a number of really damaging industrial type of activities that are not being managed and polluting the river repeatedly. So I'm just wondering, are you able to give me a sense of any thinking that you've got around protecting our urban waterways in terms of the RPS, and what sort of controls and activities you're proposing in terms of going to be more restrictive or more permissive? I mean, to give you an example, we've just had an inland port go in without any requirement for any consents. We've had people discharging methyl bromide.
Hey, okay.
So I was just trying to be, like in terms of just giving you some of the types of activities that are happening in that area.
Yeah, in terms of the freshwater package, generally it's a more stringent set of provisions, policy direction for the health of freshwater.
Okay.
So there's various policy tools along the way, which is the freshwater management units and the visions they identify, and even a degraded water body has natural character as well to a certain extent. So the emphasis on catchments and community-led outcomes response, these are all tools that enable a community when the RPS is implemented through its lower order plans, that's the regional plans and the district plans, it provides the tools for those lower order plans to put in place the provisions that the community want. And if that's strengthened provisions for those natural features, then those tools are there.
All right. So will there be greater setbacks around development alongside our rivers to protect them from adverse impact of industrial
I think
activities?
It's important to note that the RPS is going to be the higher level policy document, and then flowing down from that, we're going to be developing a new integrated regional plan, and then the districts will then develop their plan. So I think those specific more rural type parts will come then. So unfortunately, planning does take a long time.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we've got is it 2028? We're looking to do our integrated plan. So that should be where some of that more detail comes into it. But the higher level policy direction and sort of strategy for the region would be higher onus on protecting waterways from that.
So in terms of there's been a big focus discussion on the airport noise. Has there been a similar focus on controlling the activities of ports?
We have, we've met with the port and we've met with sort of other sort of concerned community groups around all of the issues and topics. And sorry, we don't have all of our sort of expert team here. Meg's our champion for airport noise.
If you can't answer it today, don't worry.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd just be interested. One of the big concerns people have, for example, has been the diesel fumes that are generated by and so there's the noise issue from the ports, or I should say port activities, because often it's not just the port, it's the inland ports as well. So I guess I'm wondering if you're looking at any sort of, if I presume like you do with the airport or with Littleton Port, you put a suite of sort of requirements around environmental impacts.
We do, and it's sort of on a stepped sort of avoid, mitigate, minimise, compensate type approach. Okay. I think there's definitely the significant regionally significant criteria policies that's both constraining those activities from harming the environment to the extent possible while still enabling them to perform their function that they're required to do, and then protecting them from reverse sensitivity. So it might be that there's a number of ways to approach it. Maybe it's that in the future you don't sort of allow more development that's going to be affected by that now, but then it's about protecting also the people that are already existing. Yeah, that's right.
I guess that's the challenge, isn't it? But I guess that's why I was concerned about that balance, because it seems like at the moment it's very enabling. So, I mean, I deal with a lot of air discharge issues, odor issues and dust issues.
Yeah.
And in Wolston, you've got in exceedance of the World Health limits for heavy particulate, and yet you're enabling more and more industrial type activities to go in that are creating all sorts of problems or issues for local residents. So I guess that's why I was quite keen to see what you're doing to be a little bit more prescriptive or controlling of activities that are generating adverse impacts.
Yeah, I think our policies are really probably having a similar effect to the existing RPS. So I think if there's feedback that we need to take a more stringent approach, although we do have the setbacks for the air quarry stuff, but so that particular point has been a bit more stringent. I think that it'd be really helpful if we could get the feedback to support us making a shift to the policies if that's what is required or what people want. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we might go to Aaron and then you can come back around. Yep. Yeah. Aaron?
Yeah, it's weird, the only saying, suggesting no one should live in the port. But anyway, a couple of, I need some definitions. What's our definition of coastal degradation? Because when you look online, there's two completely different meanings. When you're using that term, what do you mean?
Should I call our trusty expert, Andrew?
Just to introduce Andrew McLennan. So Andrew is one of the consultants at Insight that has also been helping us with parts of the RPS, including the coastal chapter. So Andrew, can you answer that question?
Probably I might need a definition about where you're using the definition potentially. I'm not sure.
Wasn't it in the earlier
slide?
I don't know. They're your slides. Didn't some of the earlier slides have coastal degradation, or did I misread that? The earlier slides. Maybe before that one? Before that one?
At the very beginning, Aaron.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, right. You might be looking at the diagram of the...
I think it was the next, yeah.
Sorry, jumping all around the place. We'll get there. So
degradation of coastal environment.
Yes. So I suppose that's at the kind of the really high issue level. And the way that the RPS is structured is that we have an issue statement, then we have an objective which is designed to solve that issue, and then we have policies. And often it's the wording of the objectives and the policies that is really crucial, and that it's sort of used the most to direct lower order decision making. So just bear that in mind in terms of where the fact that statement is at the top is just at this high level kind of issue statement. But Andrew, I'm not sure if you have any more to say about the definitions that we're using.
Yes, I mean, the short answer is there's no definition in the current proposed version that has a degradation of the coastal environment definition. I think in the slide, it's talking about making the coastal environment worse, whether that's through water quality or through feeding habitats. So I guess it's about making, in this slide particularly, at the top of the objective ladder there, it's about making the coastal environment worse, whether that's, through ecological or water quality issues.
Right, okay, quite loose. Next one, around the airport stuff, in the consultation, the property owners group have made the most noise in recent years. Are they going to be included?
Can you say that again? The property owners group?
Yeah, are they included in the consultation for the airport contour lines?
I haven't heard the name of that group before, so...
Okay, so they're the ones threatening to take us and you to court for the last couple of years, and they've quite it up.
I believe that that group is in this consultation.
Brilliant. Okay, that's good. As long as they are, because they are probably out in this part of the world the most interested. Then the definition of productive land, what does that mean?
Yeah, so for the highly productive land, the definition is, the starting point is that LUC class 1 to 3 land. So that's the sort of quality of land. And then there's a number of steps to work through to see whether
quality of the soil?
Quality of soil, sorry, yeah.
Okay, because most productive land might be where Tate Electronics is sitting or something. But you're meaning quality of soil. Okay, that's good. Thank you. That clears that up. And who decides on the 50 dB rating? Because when you look up decibel ratings, 50 dB is a quiet conversation. And when you look up and 55 is a normal conversation, what's acceptable to a neighbour is 70 to 80. So who sets that? Or where do we originally start with those numbers?
Yeah, so I guess it just goes back to the people that are going to decide on this policy document. So first off, it'll be our governing body, Te Rōpū Tuia, so that's our councillors, and then the Runanga representatives who are going to decide whether to approve the draft for public notification. So they get the say over that version. And then once it's publicly notified, it will become a hearings panel who will decide on the kind of final version of the policy statement. Very similar to the process that you will have gone through for your district plan.
Okay, and then yeah, so just on that, is I know it's factored. You've got modelling that goes up to 2084 or something for the airport. And they use collective modelling, which I believe they've never got to in the number of flights they've ever projected in the past, so the number of flight hours. But also, are we factoring in current day aircraft, or over the last couple of decades and going forward, aircraft are scheduled to get quieter and are getting quieter all the time? So are we modelling on old numbers, or are we modelling on what the future does look like?
Yeah, so just really quickly, and bearing in mind that this is often something which I'd ask our acoustic expert to weigh in on, but the modelling was based on current aircraft technology. It's not predicted that those really big aircraft that use the main north to south runway would actually get any quieter. Apparently, you can have improvements in technology for those really small aircraft because you might shift away from fossil fuels to, say, electricity, which would make the plane lighter. But we're not expecting there to be a whole lot of change in the future for the bigger aircraft that use the north to south runway.
Okay, so if you go to the European Union website on future aircraft, their opinion contradicts that, and so does Boeing's, and Boeing's one of the two.
Okay, so Aaron, have you got? We might just sort of bring it back a wee bit, or I'm sure that the team would be happy to take your feedback and run. Have you got any other questions?
Need to change in the Okay, that's fine. That's cool. We'll just wait. It's going out to consultation anyway. Which is good.
I couldn't hear a word of that.
Oh, it's going out to consultation, which this is just a pre-presentation to that. So, which is all good. It'd be good to see the feedback from various groups.
Yep, cool. Okay, thanks, man. Celeste.
Thank you. Can you just explain to me, because in the topics most relevant to council, it doesn't mention Indigenous biodiversity stuff. I know that sits across everything really, but in terms of the national policy statement on Indigenous biodiversity, where would that fit?
So we'd certainly love to have your feedback on the Indigenous biodiversity chapter. Unfortunately, because we didn't have all the time in the world, we had to cut it down to very few topics. So we're not saying, we didn't assume that that the CCC had no interest in the ecological provisions. And yes, if you have any questions about that, or you want to give us feedback, we're all ears.
There is a whole chapter on ecosystems in Indigenous biodiversity.
Yeah, it was more just that it wasn't listed here, and I think it sometimes does get missed, even though it's probably one of the key ones for us, particularly this long-term plan. I think it's really come through. So we would go through the submission process, would give feedback through that in terms of the next step. Yeah, okay, thank you.
But definitely that would be stronger. I've looked at your current one and it mentions there, and the stuff I was mentioning along the river, it's just not protecting the ecology. So we're losing a whole lot of stuff. That would be my view.
So can you just remind me, what is the best way for us to give feedback? What's the process?
Yes, so my understanding is that your staff are working through feedback on the RPS, and then we'll come to you with their kind of a draft submission, which you can add to.
Okay.
Sorry. So we've got a whole staff group at the moment that's preparing the feedback based on the whole of the plan. So we've got obviously staff in their individual kind of expertise areas, and then the intention is that on the 7th of August we'll come back to you with a whole kind of proposed feedback for a meeting, and then obviously agreement or any further comments.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So within that process, we'll have that part of it captured adequately, because I know we've put money on budget for someone to do some policy work in that space, but they're not currently in that role. So just want to make sure that we've got our eyes on that particular aspect. If you could just get that noted, thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for that. That's been really, really useful. And yeah, I mean, our team will continue to work with you and we'll obviously provide feedback in due course. So really appreciate you coming in. Thanks very much.
Thank you all for your time.
Great.
Thank you.